This is Lynn's Romance Reads, and this is the worst books I've read according to Goodreads. So if you haven't watched already, I have a companion video that is the best books I've read according to Goodreads. And so, as like the last video, I'm going to start with honorable mentions. These are books that I've read a long time ago and are generally in the YA category. So I might not remember all of the details about them, and then I'll move from the least worst, according to Goodreads, to the worst of the worst. So we'll jump right in. So honorable mentions out of the romance category. So YA. The first is Harbinger by Sara Wilson. I gave this book 2 stars. So I remember reading this in high school, and I remember being hella confused. So this is a book that our heroine gets sent to this random boarding school, and it's very dark academia, but it was just very random. I felt like I never understood the path that the story was taken. There was zero foreshadowing that like made sense. It just felt random. And basically our heroine would like wake up with blood on her hands, and like there were people dying and disappearing, and the whole thing, you're like, well, is it our heroine? And I don't think there was any HEA. It ran that line between horror thriller and fantasy, and it just was a jumbled mess. And I remember it being a jumbled mess. And it's like one of 4 books I think I've given 2 stars in my reading journey. So definitely deserves to be on the worst list. Then next for honorable mentions, the Merlin Prophecy by which is part of the Avalon graphic novel series by Meg Cabot. So I read the original Avalon High book series, or book, singular book, by Meg Cabot, and I enjoyed it. It's basically a King Arthur retelling set in high school, following our heroine, who I think is like the Lady of the Lake. I gave the original book, true novel, I want to say like 4 or 5 stars. I don't have it written down. There's 3 graphic novels as like, quote, a continuation, and I thought it was a continuation, and I gave all of these graphic novels 1 star. And I don't remember fully why, but I think the reason is that each one of these are like, quote, slice of life graphic novels, and they don't continue on the original novel story or anything that happened in the novel book. So it just felt very disjointed. I didn't understand what the purpose of the graphic novels were. Or did they even just follow the same story and I was reading the same story in a graphic novel format? I don't fully know, but I remember reading that and being like, that I didn't get any new part of the story. I didn't see any new character development, nothing. It was disappointing. So I agree, that should be on my worst list. Then next I have Crazy Beautiful by Lauren Baratz-Logsted. So LBL was one of the key YA writers when I was reading. I read a bunch of books by her. And Crazy Beautiful is a variation on the Beauty and the Beast trope. I gave it 4 stars. I remember it feeling a smidge disjointed, but overall it was a pretty strong book, and I'm kind of confused on why it's in the worst category. The premise of the story is that our hero transfers into the high school, and he doesn't have his hands, either hand. They're amputated off at the wrist, and I can't remember if this was the gossip story or the true story, was that he was like tinkering with a bomb and he blew off his hands. He gets hooks, 8, and so he has 2 hooks on his hands instead of his hands. And so I don't fully remember all of the details of the story, but our heroine, it's a love story. So it's a YA romance. And I don't fully remember what would have made it be on this list, other than the fact maybe it had ableism and poor representation, him as an amputee. But yeah, I'm a little confused by this one. I remember it, and I probably read it between 10 and 15 years ago, so it was memorable at the least. And then the next book, this one deserves to be on this list in my opinion. This is Salt and Storm by Kendall Kruper. I rated it 4 stars, which I don't know what I was thinking. It's a 3-star book. And I didn't change it because I went by what I originally rated it. But it's a 3-star book. And I can't tell you what this book was about because I'm very confused. And I finished reading it and was very confused about what it was about. I think it was a duet. And I remember our heroine had some degree of witchcraft. And that's the extent of what I know because the rest is confused and confusion, poor writing, don't understand. Deserves to be on the list. And then the last book in the honorable mention / YA section is Ink by Amanda Sun. I gave this 5 stars and I loved it. So the premise of this book is so interesting because we have a white American heroine whose family gets relocated to Japan. And so she ends up being enrolled into this private Japanese school. That's it's not a boarding school, but it is a premier athletic institution that's private. And the entire story is her kind of developing a romance with our hero that ends up kind of having powers. It's a fantasy. And it has a lot to do with Japanese mythology. I don't fully remember all of the mythology side of things, but basically our hero has the power to have his drawings animated. And it's so fascinating. And I really enjoyed it. And it was a 5-star read. And I have no idea why it's on this list. I really enjoyed it. Again, read it 10, 15 years ago. So those were the honorable mentions. Now we're going to go on to the romance books. So the best of the worst, number 10 is The Wedding Date by Jasmine Guillory. So this has an average rating of 3.60 with 122,000 reviews. And I gave it a 4-star in 2021. So this is one of the first books that I read. I read it after The Hating Game. So I was kind of finding books similar to The Hating Game. And so this one popped up. And I remember we have a black POC heroine with a white hero. And it's kind of a fake dating situation. And it was fine. I read a handful of Jasmine Guillory, a handful, maybe 2, and I just find her to be a little kind of forgettable. And traditionally published contemporary romances, it was just a little forgettable, and I believe it to be a 4-star. And I'll have a separate rating video, but 4-star is really kind of an average read for me. Next degree of worstness is The Tourist Attraction by Sara Morgenthaler. We're going to go with that. So this book has an average rating of 3.57 stars with 24,000 people reviewing it. I gave it 4 stars in 2021. this series is pretty interesting. I've continued reading in the series. The series is set in the small town Alaska. We follow various pairings of outsiders with locals, and because it's kind of a tourist trap town, all the locals really hate the people who come to visit, but then their livelihoods also very much depend on the tourist business. So I believe this is book 1, and our heroine really loves Alaska and has dreamed about going to Alaska, and she has saved up for years and has gone to Alaska, and she's taken off like 2 weeks from work. And when she gets there, she's basically is trying to figure out a way to stay, and she ends up in a relationship with the owner of the local dive bar that named the Tourist Trap, because it's he actively hates locals, and so he makes everything as gross as he can, and the locals love it. So I think that's the book I liked. It's a 4-star. It was I forget why it wasn't quite a 5-star. I think there was some hiccups in the conflict that didn't do it for me, but I'm surprised it's on the worst list. I wouldn't have put it on the worst list of books I've read. Then number 8, next worst, is The Good Luck Charm by Helena Hunting. This has an average rating of 3.56 stars, and I gave it 5 stars in 2021. So I will preface this by saying Helena Hunting was one of the authors that I really found to like in romance. I haven't read her Pup series, but I read the Shacking Up series. I think I've read through book 4 or 5, and the first 2 books I think were pretty good, and then it fell off for me. But this is a standalone, and our heroine is a nurse, and it's a second chance romance with the hero, who is a professional hockey player, and his mom, I believe, has a health scare, and so he comes back to town, and his family like helped raise our heroine, and so she's still very close with his parents, and it puts them in forced proximity, and they really have to address the reasons why they broke up, which has a lot to do with his career as a professional athlete and kind of a lack of trust. And so they have to like kind of figure out how to get past those issues. There's some non-starts in this and some angst, but I really found it enjoyable. So I'm a little surprised it's on the list. Looking back, is it like a memorable series? No, but I'm a little surprised it's on the list. Then next worst is the Ex Hex by Erin Sterling. This has an average rating of 3.55 stars, and I gave it 5 stars. So I will say I didn't have super high expectations of this. It's a contemporary published witchy paranormal romance, and so our heroine gets broken up with in like high school or early college, and by another male witch. I can't remember if he's classified as a witch or a warlock in this world, but and as a fluke or as a prank, she curses him drunk one night, and nothing happens, and so she didn't expect anything to happen. It was supposed to be a prank. Well, he comes into town to kind of fix the to check in on the magic of the town, because his family helped found this town. And as soon as he crosses into city limits, he has this series of accidents and magic gone awry that we end up finding out is because the curse is real. It just didn't get activated until he came back into town. And so our hero and heroine work together to resolve and fix the magic. It was a little unmemorable. It was enjoyable at the time, but I felt no desire to continue on to the next book, which I think just released recently, or to pick up anything else by Erin Sterling. It was just an okay read. I'm not sure it's worth being on one of the worst books I've read, but it's definitely a little forgettable and a little average. Then next is I Owe You One by Sophie Kinsella. This has an average rating of 3.54 stars, and I gave it 4. Realistically, it might be more like a 3. So this one follows our hero and heroine who run into each other, and for whatever reason, our hero gives our heroine a coffee mug with an I owe you on it. And the entire story goes back and forth on them trading favors, or trading IOUs, not favors with like the asterisks. And so at the beginning of the book, she's dating someone, and over the course of the book, our heroine breaks up with our hero, and our hero really gets in the middle of, or the ex gets in the middle of our hero and our heroine, and I didn't like it. I didn't like it. It didn't work for me. It belongs on this list. The conflict was overdramatic. It was a ton of miscommunication. The ex-boyfriend was just in the middle of things, and no. There could have been enough conflict and conflict resolution without throwing a bad ex-boyfriend in the middle. No. Then number 5 is Well Played, the number 2 in the Well Met medieval series by DeLuca. This has an average rating of 3.53 stars, and I gave it 5 stars. So the first book has to do with kind of a enemies to lovers rivalry. It was cute. It was adorable. I read on. Book 2 follows one of her friends who is works in town and has volunteered for ages, and her relationship with one of the members of this medieval music group, and something with kilts. And so she thinks she's messaging and she's a plus size heroine, and she thinks she's messaging and interacting with one of the actual band managers, but she's been messaging and falling in love with the band's manager, who they're all related. It's a family band. And so there's so much miscommunication, and it takes basically until way too long for everything to come to light, and it becomes this big thing because they've had this long distance virtual relationship over text and instant Facebook message for months, and when he's back into town, he basically has to come clean about it, and it didn't quite work. And then she ends up basically leaving her life and traveling from Renaissance fair to Renaissance fair. It was fine. I gave it 5 stars, so I did enjoy it, but I think the more I've read, DeLuca's books just kind of end up being falling a little flat for me. And it is traditionally published, which might be part of the reason. So I agree that that's kind of, that one, book 3 in that series, I think is my least favorite, and I definitely would put that book on this list. Next worst is Waiting for Tom Hanks by Carrie Winfrey. This is 4 stars for me, and it has an average rating of 3.51 stars. She's from Columbus, Ohio, and this cute little town that ends up having a lot of kind of like Hallmark style movies filmed there. And so her whole thing is like she's waiting for a Tom Hanks character. She's waiting for her rom-com hero, and ends up having a meet cute with the actor that's playing this role on this Hallmark style movie that's being shot in her town. And it's the romance, and it was forgettable and just blah. So belongs on that list. Next, we have Toxic Desire by Robin Lovett. This is the first book in the Planet of Desire series, and it has an average rating of 3.05 or 50, and I gave it 4 stars. Robin Lovett was trying really hard, and she had a lot of world building to do, and I think the romance kind of fell a little flat in comparison to the world building that she had to do. And the concept is that they're on a planet, they're enemies, they're in this battle, and they get put into a escape pod and they crash onto this planet, and the planet has a compound inherent to the world that makes you sex mad, basically, and so you have to have sex. And there's a lot of insta-lust and a lot of like physical relationship building first, and I don't think the groundwork had been laid for the actual romance beyond that, because they were so fanatic because of the state that this planet had put them in. And I think once you got into the second book, which I have read, they have a cure that kind of like weakens the effects. They still have to regularly have sex in order to survive on this planet, because the compound's still there, but it reduces kind of the lust haze associated with it. So I think just the first book had a lot of work to do in building the world, and and there's a lot of insta-lust, and the relationship kind of came by the wayside. So I can understand why this is on the list, unfortunately. Then number 2, A Lady's Formula for Love by Elizabeth Everett. This has an average rating of 3.37 stars, and I gave it 4 stars in 2021. And now that I'm thinking about it, it might have been more like a 3-star. So this is a historical romance that is based off of kind of the beginnings of women getting into science. And I will say, I'm a STEM person, so I get very finicky on how things are represented. And how do I say this? I don't know every in and out of every step in women in science history, but overarchingly, I felt that it was a little unrealistic. So this is a women's club or women's society that's devoted to scientific advancement, and it's all of these women that are of a certain socioeconomic class and are part of this group that is pushing the boundaries and having scientific discussions. And again, I'm not going to say 100% certainty that it doesn't have historical accuracy, but I found its historical accuracy to push the limits of what I would believe. It just didn't land. It didn't work for me. It was feminist in a way that was heavy-handed and felt unrealistic for the time frame that we were talking about. And then the final book is the Bridal Boot Camp novella, 0.5 in the series, by Meg Cabot, which has 3.03 stars. I gave it 5 stars, but it's a novella. My standards for novellas aren't terribly high. I picked up Meg Cabot kind of as a fluke. I was flipping through my library's ebook collection of what was kind of available and popular, and I saw Meg Cabot, and I was like, because I had recognized the name because obviously she wrote The Princess Diaries and several other series that I read as a YA reader or just shy of YA reader. It's a novella. It's a romance novella. It was short. It was sweet. It did its job. Book 1 in the series definitely deserves on this list, and so if considering most people are harsher with novellas than full length, it makes sense that this is on the list. So with that, that is the worst books I've read according to Goodreads. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on any of these books. I know I kind of went through the romance books relatively quickly and spent a lot of time on the honorable mentions, but let me know what you think. Please like, comment, or subscribe as you see fit, and I'll see you in the next video.